Hello everyone, this is Dr. Hamilton, and I'm going to discuss today The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. And so what I'm going to do is first I'm going to give you a basic overview of the story, a framework, and then I'm going to discuss the characters and some of the themes, as well as I will make a point about the story that I think has not been made by other commentators on it. So what is the story about? The story is about an incredibly wealthy guy named Sanger Rainsford. He's an American, and he owns a yacht. He clearly doesn't really have any employment other than big game hunting, which is, of course, the most expensive sport that you could possibly imagine. He goes around hunting large animals. He travels all over the world hunting large animals and writing about his experiences. So he hunts lions, jaguars, cougars, crocodiles, moose, buffalo, basically anything that you could imagine. He hunts, and he writes about it. He has written a famous book. He's famous for in the big game hunting world. He's famous for writing books, and especially one book on hunting the snow leopard. So he goes to exotic places and he hunts large animals. He uses his wealth. It's not clear how he's gotten his wealth, but anyway, the story starts off with him on a yacht, and he's on his way to the Amazon jungle to hunt the jaguar in the Amazon jungle. But on his way to hunt the jaguar in the Amazon jungle, he passes through the Caribbean, and specifically one Caribbean island. It's in the middle of the night, and this is called Ship Trap Island. Ship Trap Island. And his ship doesn't actually, he doesn't actually have a shipwreck, but he falls into the water, and he gets, he has to swim to this island, Ship Trap Island. As he's swimming to the island, he hears these ominous gun reports, and he screams. He washes up on the island, and he discovers that there is this mansion there, a chateau actually, with a man occupied by a man named General Zaroff, and his servant Yvonne, who is a giant, but he is deaf and mute. General Zaroff is a charismatic figure, but he is also kind of disturbing. He has lots of energy. It turns out that General Zaroff is a master hunter himself, and General Zaroff, when he sees Rainsford, treats him like a celebrity. He's shocked. He lives on this island alone with Yvonne, who must not be very much company because he's deaf and mute, and he is, this basically his muscle, this giant, and his servant. And certainly is not an adept or master hunter like Rainsford. So he treats Rainsford like a guest, and he feels anxious to tell him about his own hunting prowess and his own journey as a hunter. So General Zaroff tells Rainsford eventually over dinner about his problem, and his problem is that he's become bored. He's become bored. He's hunted every single animal known to human beings, and he has become bored. And one day when he had hunted the jaguar in the Amazon, which coincidentally is the same animal that Rainsford is on his way to hunt. So General Zaroff, it is implied, is similar to Rainsford, but maybe a little bit farther ahead of him on a path. He has gone to hunt the jaguar, which is legendary in the Amazon, and he says that he was looking forward to this because he thought it would be very cunning and tricky, but in fact it was another great disappointment to him, and because he has gotten to the point in his hunting where it's no longer a challenge to him. It's less of a sport. It's not dangerous anymore for him. It's more of a slaughter. And so it's just he's become a sort of machine killing these animals, and he has no sense of the adventure or the danger of the hunt anymore. And so he gets this idea that dawns on him in the middle of this crisis that he has after hunting the jaguar in the Amazon, that he is going to go for a more interesting prey, a more dangerous prey. In fact, the most dangerous game. Game here being a pun on hunted animals. Large hunted animals are called game. So the most dangerous game, of course, is a riddle. It is a human. And the most dangerous game is the game that General Zaroff has developed to play. And he shows Rainsford this trap, that he has created. He is a great hunter, and so he has created a great inventive trap for humans. And the trap is a light that he has put out on his craggy coast, or a set of lights that he turns on. And it looks like there is a port for ships to land in. And because this is the Caribbean, and there are lots of storms, lots of it is hurricane territory, and so ships often get distressed, and so he turns these lights on, and he says that he directs the ships are directed into port, sometimes in the middle of a storm, and those ships are then devoured by the sharp rocks on the jagged sharp rocks on his coastline. And so he has his man trap that he has set up. And once the sailors wash ashore, he kidnaps them, and he enlists them in what he calls his school. He has a school for them, a training school, he calls it, in which he trains them to be prey. He trains them to be his prey. To flee from him, and he makes a deal with them that it's not a deal exactly. He gives them instructions that he will give them 3 hours head start, and then if they survive for 3 days, and he will return them to the nearest port, and they will get to live. But obviously, if they lose, then they are killed. And he gives them a hunting knife, and he just has as a good sportsman that he is, he only gives himself a .22 revolver to hunt them with. And so apparently no one has survived this game so far that he plays, because he's a master hunter, also because he has a gun and they don't. So he tries to get Rainsford interested in this idea, and Rainsford immediately says that this is murder. I'm not going to go on a hunt with you. I mean, he wants this fellow hunter that he respects to join him on his great hunt. And in fact, he invites him to see the other room where he has all of his trophies, the heads of all of the men that he has hunted, and Rainsford sort of politely declines. But not incredibly enthusiastic about seeing those trophies that he has. So eventually, what happens is General Zaroff, of course, gets the idea. He realizes that he has become bored with the sailors that he hunts because they're not smart enough for him, and so he thinks the ultimate challenge, the most dangerous game. The most dangerous game of the most dangerous game would be Rainsford. The most dangerous person to hunt would be the master hunter, which is Rainsford. So he would be the most dangerous game as a human. The most dangerous of those would be the hunter himself. And so he calls this his game of outdoor chess that he involves Rainsford in. It's the wonderful game of outdoor chess, except that he gets murdered if he loses. And so the hunt begins that evening, and the rest of the story is about how Rainsford develops ingenious traps in order to foil General Zaroff's attempts to capture him. But there's something deeper here going on with the story that I want to point out, which is, and that I haven't seen others point out, which is that Rainsford, General Zaroff is really a nightmare version of Rainsford. This story has similarities, not identical, but it has similarities to Robert Louis Steven's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Rainsford and the general are both fabulously wealthy, so wealthy that they don't have to work at all. They can just indulge in their sports, their pastimes. They're both, as I pointed out, hunting. They both hunted, identical prey, but really to the point where General Zaroff has already hunted the animal that Rainsford is on his way to the Amazon to hunt, suggesting that General Zaroff is farther along the path on a journey that Rainsford is already on. General Zaroff has this very famous explanation, justification for what he does. He says that he does this when Rainsford calls his hunt, his dangerous game, murder. General Zaroff says, life is for the strong, to be lived by the strong, and if needs be, taken by the strong. The weak of the world were put here to give the strong pleasure. I am strong. Why should I not use my gift? If I wish to hunt, why should I not hunt? So this seems like a twisted form of social Darwinism. He regards himself as the strong, and he regards these sailors that wash up as the weak, and he feels perfectly justified in playing his role, which is simply to devour the weak, to trap them with his hunter's trap and to devour them. So you would think, well, this is obviously immoral, but and Rainsford points it out immediately as murder, and he never wavers from that, except that Rainsford himself has used exactly the same justification for hunting the animals that he hunts. So Rainsford's friend Whitney asked Rainsford if he's ever thought about the feelings of the jaguars that he hunts, the animals that he hunts, and Rainsford's response is, nonsense, be a realist. The world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are the hunters. And he doesn't say humans and animals are two different classes. He says the world is made up of two different classes. And considering the fact that Rainsford and General Zaroff are both fabulously wealthy, we can imagine that this doesn't just apply to the relationship between hunter and hunted. It also applies to other relationships, rich and poor, owner and employee. Any situation where there is power that is simply arbitrary given to one party, and powerlessness, which is arbitrary, that is conferred on another party. Rainsford is a man who is utterly numb to his role in a power relation. And it's not just about hunting. This is not a story that is an anti-hunting story. It is not a story although vegetarianism is great, it's not a story that is encouraging people to be vegetarians. It's asking people, it shows a character who's fundamentally numb and ignorant or uninterested, complacent, lazy about power relations that he is involved in, where he is the powerful and the powerless are subject to his power. And this stupidity, this blindness that Rainsford has is also something that General Zaroff shares, though General Zaroff exaggerates it. He takes Rainsford's premises to a monstrous conclusion, but the conclusions are no different really than the premises. I mean, the logic is no different than Rainsford's logic. General Zaroff's logic is no different than Rainsford's logic, except it's just the strong and the weak as opposed to the hunter and the hunted. But those are both terms for the same thing. So how different really is Rainsford from General Zaroff? Well, Rainsford immediately says, no, hunting humans is a line too far. That is murder, and I will not concede to that. And of course, that's what gets, part of what gets Rainsford in trouble with General Zaroff and ends up getting him to be the prey. But so he does stand up for a moral principle, but he doesn't have a lot of ground to stand on here. And what I want to, you think about in relation to this story is that Richard Connell, gets us through Rainsford's experience to start thinking about these relationships between the powerful and the powerless that we generally don't question. And it's not just this relationship between the hunter and the hunted. It's other relationships between the powerful and the powerless. And he deliberately gives General Zaroff this social Darwinist justification for what he does. And the problem, aside from the fact that it's obviously monstrous, but the problem with General Zaroff's logic is that even if it was true that nature is like this, that the strong dominate the weak, it does not follow that because something is natural, that it is good, or we should agree with it, or we should just concede and capitulate to it. In fact, our humanity lies in our ability to resist things that are natural, to resist situations that are unjust. That's where our human sense of justice comes in. And what Connell describes and what General Zaroff has created is a picture of the hell, the nightmare that is what human beings become when they simply capitulate to the idea that what is fine, that the strong simply devour the weak. Then human life simply devolves into the hunter and the hunted, the powerful and the powerless, the wretched of the earth. It is simply a vision of hell. And this story is actually quite prescient in a way, because General Zaroff's nightmare of an island is actually really nothing in comparison to the Nazis, who took these ideas of social Darwinism to their logical conclusion, whereby the weak are simply eradicated and exterminated, and the strong, the idea that the strong are simply smugly entitled to eliminate the weak, and the idea that they implemented, which was that the stronger, that we should engineer our society in the way that they imagined nature was engineered. They're wrong about that, but they imagined that nature was engineered, whereby the strong simply thrive and become stronger, and the weak are eliminated or exterminated. So this is a nightmare image. Now, I think that from the point of view of Rainsford, the protagonist, Rainsford really represents the kind of moron, the kind of idiot, the kind of imbecile who never questions his own entitlement to the power relations that he's involved in. Never asks himself why I am the hunter and they are the hunted. Never asks himself why I am the rich and they are the poor. Never, in other words, puts himself in other people's place until he has to be thrown into that situation where he is physically hunted down by another version of himself, by the powerful, who's General Zaroff, who's simply exercising power the way that he does over animals. The kind of imbecile who never questions their own entitlement until they are thrown into exactly the situation. They have to be beaten over the head by life in order to say, oh, this is what fear is really like. Must be what the animals that I've been hunting have been experiencing all along. My God, amazing that. I never could have imagined. And so I think that Rainsford represents this, the kind of person who is blinded by their own position, their own entitlement, the ideology of entitlement, and so he ironically suffers exactly the fate that he has imposed on others. Now the question is, Rainsford, in this story throughout, once he is challenged and once General Zaroff takes his own premises to their extreme, he is horrified by what they represent and what they mean. he's genuinely horrified, and he never flinches from that. In fact, he is powerless in relation to General Zaroff. General Zaroff is armed. He has Yvonne there, and Rainsford nonetheless asserts a moral principle, even though he knows that it's placing his own life in peril. However, in the very end, I think the very end is still ambiguous because, as we know, Rainsford survives General Zaroff's most dangerous game, and in fact, over the 3 days, he develops different traps that General Zaroff's dogs and Yvonne and even General Zaroff eventually gets injured by. But his final trap is that he disappears in the ocean, and he winds up in General Zaroff's bed, hiding behind his curtains when General Zaroff comes back after failing to catch Rainsford, and there he murders General Zaroff. But the very last line is that Rainsford, after murdering General Zaroff, and he also murders Yvonne in one of his traps, sleeps in General Zaroff's bed, and he says it was it was the best sleep that he had ever had. Now, the problem with this is that by sleeping in his bed, Rainsford has become master of the chateau that General Zaroff lives in, master of the manor, and the all of the comparisons between General Zaroff and Rainsford culminate in this. And the question is, has Rainsford actually become General Zaroff? I mean, certainly he's murdered, right? Did he have to murder General Zaroff? Maybe in order to survive. I mean, I think it would be very difficult for him to survive. I mean, he would have to trust that General Zaroff would let him go. So maybe he murdered him to ensure his own survival, or maybe he murdered him as the first in a series of murders. Maybe General Zaroff really is just ahead of Rainsford on that path. Remember, General Zaroff has already finished hunting the jaguar and the Amazon, that Rainsford is about to hunt. Maybe General Zaroff represents Rainsford's future. Maybe this is a future that Rainsford avoids by realizing how horrible it is to take his premises to their obvious conclusion. Maybe Rainsford becomes General Zaroff. I think that the ending is ambiguous. I think that it certainly leans towards Rainsford not becoming General Zaroff, but there is certainly a collapsing of identity at the end. And so I think that the ending is ambiguous. And I ask you, do you think that that Rainsford in the end becomes General Zaroff, or do you think that he he simply has learned something about his own responsibility in these power dyads, in these power pairs, that he, in this pairing, has he learned something about his responsibility over those that he has power? So I will leave you guys with that, and hopefully we will hopefully speak soon. Thank you very much.